Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our conversation on difficult conversations, consent, what's tech, agreeing to tech really mean. We'll be starting in the next couple of minutes, just giving some people some time to join. Appreciate it's lunch hour, so people might want to grab a sandwich to sit down and watch this one. Hi, sorry, we're just giving it a couple of minutes to start. I know somebody's just messaged about not having sound. If you can't hear me right now, please do let me know. If not, we're just being quiet for a moment. We'll give it another minute and then we'll get cracking. Right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I think we'll make a start and let people continue to trickle in. Welcome to the second in our series on difficult conversations that we're hosting throughout March. My name's Katie Thorne. I'm the Director of Innovation at the Digital Care Hub, and we're really, really pleased to have an amazing panel here today for this. Apologies for background noise from my end. I'm at a conference in Birmingham, and this is the quietest spot that I can find, but rest assured I will be on mute for most of it, and my wonderful panel will be speaking instead. So this is the second in our series where we really wanted to highlight some of the sort of grey areas around where technology and care intersect. Our first session last week, we focused on people's right to privacy versus surveillance, and we're talking about sensors. And this conversation is all about consent and when people should be asked for their consent when technology is used and what happens if they don't. And we have an incredible panel who will be speaking from their experience, who I'll come to in a second to ask to introduce themselves. In general housekeeping from me, you are all muted and we can't see you, so please do use the chat and Q&A to interact. We'd love to hear your perspectives and your opinions as well. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat. My wonderful colleague Fiona is here and she'll be keeping an eye on that to make sure we don't miss anything. Then we have a little bit of scene setting I kind of wanted to put on this one. So we've had some recent research from the Health Foundation, which has shown that there is a true diversity in views about when people think they should be asked their consent when technology, and AI in particular, is used in care. And some people want to be asked for their explicit consent every time, while others assume that technology will form part of their care. So we're in a world where we have increasing digitization. Many care providers are now exclusively using digital social care record systems, for example. And some people have no and fluctuating capacity, which can really impact conversations around consent. So we're going to deep dive into some of these topics today. And also talk a little bit about the legal framework about consent and what that means and how social care can make sure that we're always keeping in line with the legal area as it is now. So I will now pass to some of my panel to introduce themselves, say where they're from, where their interest is in care and their background. So I'm going to go alphabetically to make it fair. So Amy, I could pass to you.
Hi everyone, hi Katie, thanks for that. So my name's Amy Lewis, I'm Managing Director at Just Checking. My background is supporting adults with a range of different support needs, but mainly autistic people, adults with learning disabilities, and those with other complex support needs, from support working roles through to registered manager, and area kind of regional management operational roles before I joined Just Checking, which is where I'm the managing director now, in 2019, whereby we support people through kind of the thoughtful application of sensor-based technology. So that might be for assessment purposes for a really short-term period in order to understand someone's care and support needs better, or it might be in a long-term application, i.e. in someone's home, to support them to be more in control of their home, and in making the home work for them, so controlling lighting, or for staff to understand when somebody might need support and that kind of thing. My values and experience are also based on growing up with autistic siblings and other members of my family who are autistic. So I think I come from a position of kind of human rights based thinking most of the time, and people's right to make their own decisions and their right to do things for themselves in the way that they want to. So that's usually my standpoint.
Thanks, Amy. Really helpful. And Dee.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Dee Woodcock. I work at Leicester Aldridge Solicitors. I am an employment and data protection specialist, so I use sort of help employers and other sort of care homes, etc., where they're looking at new systems. We work alongside our care team here at Leicester Aldridge on the implementation of new technologies, privacy notices, subject access requests, and all of those. So we see a vast range of issues that arise from a lot of the AI technology, not just where care providers want to implement those, but also where people may be using those and become aware that it wasn't being used as they thought it, the data wasn't being processed as they thought it was, etc. So we see it from both sides of the point of view, but I think regulation is certainly important as AI becomes more intrusive to an extent, but supportive, and just making sure we get those balances in place.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Hello, hi. So I'm actually speaking from the spinal unit, and they've kindly let me use a room here. I'm somebody with a spinal injury, and I'm a member of the National Co-Production Advisory Group, which is part of Think Local Act Personal, as is Vicky, who's here as well. And I'm also an expert by experience with CQC. So I love tech, and the more tech I can have at home to give me control, independence is great. And I suppose I've been involved in the Oxford AI project, where we've talked about the ethics of AI. And obviously I can consent, but it's made me think a lot about data, what I use. And yesterday I was at the same conference that Katie's at, and I went round thinking about, do any of the tech providers who are selling all these sensors think about ethics and consent? Well, a few do, but many didn't, and didn't really think about it. And then I thought, here at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, they've just changed over systems to from doing paper-based. They've gone to Epic, which I used in another hospital. My care provider's done the same. Nobody asked me, was I happy for that? And they can now access other systems. So my care provider can access my medical records. Am I happy with that? To some extent, but I would have liked to have been asked. And they've just, when I asked, they said, well, you signed up, I suppose, 8 or 9 years ago when I first used, I consented. I didn't consent to them going to my GP to look at my medical records. So there's a whole area of consent, not just obviously for tech. And then yesterday I met a commissioner from Lancashire, and her new, I said, well, what's new? She started using Nobi. And I said that which is a sort of a quite sophisticated piece of kit from Finland, Sweden, that can track people, learn through AI. And so I looked at what they have changed in the last 6 months. So they can record you as a stick person, and they hadn't actually seen it before. So that was quite interesting. So there's a different consent level for that than there is for something else. So that was interesting. But she's buying she's recommending everyday tech. So a lot of us have got Alexas at home and things like that. And they obviously store our data. So there's all sorts of different issues that occurred to me from that. But I'll save the rest for the conversation later.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I think we will definitely pick up on all of those topics today. Lindsay.
Hi, yeah, I'm Lindsay Way. I'm the clinical director for a charity called Active Prospects. We provide supported living and residential and outreach support to adults with mental health needs, learning disabilities, autistic people, and combinations thereof. We've been using digital care records for a good few years now. We also use sensor-based tech and wearables, a whole variety of things. So I have experience of people who have capacity and have consented to the use of those, and people who lack capacity and have best interest decisions, and people who have opted out altogether of all of those things.
And Mark.
Yes, my name is Mark de Bernhardt Lane. I'm a senior advisor in digital transformation, working within the LGA, focusing on adult social care and working with local authorities. I've been working in technology for about, 35 years, 25 years in public service, probably a dozen years in adult social care. But if you add it up, that would make me 72, which I'm not. But so there's a bit of overlap. Previously, I was a commissioner for adult social care, including technology. And I've worked directly with carers and adults with cognitive decline. I've been a carer myself and probably will be again. What I, just as a kind of opening thought for myself, is that I've always seen as if we're using technology to enhance person-centered care, it's got to be personal. And picking up on what Jennifer said was that, or it's Lindsay, I think, it's not a one and done with consent. It's a start of a journey, and certainly I think that things change and things can't be assumed. And if technology in care is not negotiable as the care itself, it really isn't an innovation. It becomes an imposition. So that's me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And I should say as well that Mark is here on his own perspectives and is not speaking on behalf of the LGA, to be very clear.
Thank you very much for the boilerplate.
Yeah,
Katie.
no problem. And Vicky.
Thanks, Katie. Hey, so yes, my name is Vicky Forfar. I'm actually what's known as a person with lived experience of having autism and learning difficulties. So that's kind of the way I'm looking into this webinar. But also, for as long as I can remember, I've been passionate about making things better with and for people with disabilities. And through my experience of working with different people, I've found some people are great at tech, and some people eat tech for breakfast. And I feel like, but there's a lot of people I know who can't do tech for varying different reasons, and the move for all things going digital worries me a little bit. And so anyway, that's where I'm coming from, and that's why I'm excited to be a part of this work.
Thank you so much. And I think amazing sort of diversity of experiences and perspectives here. And so hopefully we can do a real sort of deep dive into some of the different issues that we see around consent and care. And some of them have already been raised by our panelists. So I'm going to start with my sort of first prompt question, and then the panel can kind of respond and respond to each other as well. And please do feel free in the chat as well to add your perspectives and opinions. You all have something to contribute to this conversation as well. I'll make sure to bring them in to the panel who may not be keeping an eye on the chat. So we've already heard that people feel very differently about being asked if technology should be part of their care. From your perspective, how can we ensure people do feel that they've been properly asked, that they've been given their opportunity to consent, and not just told what is going to happen? Jennifer, I don't know if you wanted to come in first on that one, just as it was very similar to some of your opening.
I think really similar to what I said before. And it's really at the different levels, and to repeatedly ask people for consent and understanding. And not, in consent, it's no different to anything else with consent with tech. I can decide whether I want a cup of coffee or tea, but you might not be able to understand something else. So it's understanding those levels of consent and putting it in a way people can understand. And with tech, it brings into a whole different level.
Thanks, Jennifer. Dee, I saw you came off mute. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, we talk about consent. Under data protection, we have the 7 guiding principles there that, any personal data about us that's used, and we're talking not just about personal data, we're talking about sensitive personal data, what we call special category data now. So that includes healthcare, biometrics, all of those kind of things. And I see that pervade not only in employment, but through care as well. And if we look at the principles of the data protection, data should be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. Now, consent is only a part of that. You can process personal data, special category data about you through legal obligations for a company's legitimate interests and things like that. So consent is just really one part of that. But when we look at break down consent, we're talking about you being able to know specifically what data is being processed about you, and you need to be informed of that. So that's the importance of privacy notices. So that's what you should be looking at, certainly, as you take on tech, looking at, and they should be setting out for you exactly what they're doing with your data. Like Jennifer was saying, it's quite a concern when you find as well that, you might believe that you're supplying data to one organization, and then you suddenly find that actually another organization is now saying that they can access your data. And as you say, you're not aware of that. And really, it is their obligation to be informing you and letting you know so that you can see how that's being processed to decide whether you do still consent to that processing taking place.
Thank you. Mark, so you were off mute, and then Lindsay and Vicky, I saw your hand come up, so I'll do Mark, Lindsay, Vicky.
Yes. I think that it's also about how people are asked rather than being told, and it's sort of engaging people in a conversation, not just about the functional aspects of it. It's data, it's collected, but I suppose sort of like what I would sort of term sort of consent transparency. It's really focusing on, by giving consent will enable some of these your outcomes that you want to be met, but also by giving consent, what are the implications of that? What does that mean about your data? Who's going to see it? And how often, and what that actually means in terms of them, rather than just talking about sort of technology and function, which doesn't give them. So it's sort of shifting the conversation, I think, from a kind of sort of, yes, it's an informed consent to a dialogue which is almost a relational consent. And by that also I mean that sometimes people in that discussion, there's a power dynamic going on, especially the person who's receiving care might not, because of that, the relationship and the power imbalance, might find it hard to say no. So I think, having that conversation and focusing on these areas and developing that sort of relational consent is important to me.
Katie, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was not off mute. It's had to happen to somebody, and apparently it's me. So thank you, Mark. Lindsay.
Thank you. Yeah, I was I'm going to reflect what Mark says. They absolutely, totally. It's not about a one-stop question. Do you consent or do you not consent to this? It's about dialogue, and revisiting that conversation more than once, multiple times, through the person's experience and growing experience of the tech that they are using. So I think for me, there's something about doing this in a very practical way, giving someone the opportunity to try out the tech that you are talking about, so they can see how it works, not only from the perspective of themselves, but also from the perspective of the person that may be viewing that data, that information that's coming through, so they can see both sides of it. Making sure you have accessible formats that give both the concerns and the benefits to the tech that's being discussed, and making sure that you have frequent reviews and check-ins with that person to say, this is how we're working with your data. Are you happy with that still? How are you experiencing using this tech? Is it working for you? I've seen people try things like wearables and then decide that they can't use them anymore because they buzz on their wrist every so often randomly, and that buzzing means they can't cope with that anymore and they don't want to use it anymore. They still want their epilepsy monitored or whatever it might be monitored, but not with that wearable. And if you're not having dialogue with people, then you're not getting true consent.
Yeah, I absolutely agree about the dialogue being important. I think we're definitely going to pick that one up some more. Vicky, you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Katie. And yes, absolutely agreed. Right, yes, and consent is all very well. If you understand technology, or are able to use it. I mean, I personally eat technology for breakfast, and that's how much I love it. But not everybody is in the same position, and especially somebody who's got a learning disability or autism, whose capacity may be very questionable at the very best of times, on very short-term memory, I etc. When you combine them both together, and and you're expecting them to consent to something that's important. Let's just say their support plan, just for example. Well, unless they have that written down on paper, as a written reminder for them, then consent is near enough impossible. Oh, because I mean, I know one of my friends and colleagues in that position, and you ask her to sign something using technology, she'll just give you a blank look. She won't have a clue what you're talking about. And she's not alone. There's many others in exactly the same position. In which case, it would be better to have written paper copies, so you've got something visible that you can see. As and if you've got somebody who's blind as well, then technology, digital or consent, that's practically non-existent. Well, it's not going to happen. But there are people where digital tech would work as well. I mean, it would certainly work for me. I mean, and I've had to give consent that many times on technology. I am kind of used to it by now. And so digital consent would work just fine. So I guess the point is there's no one size fits all when it comes to this. And digitalization should not be used as a means of excluding people. So they still want to be included in their support plans or anything involving their care. And I'll shut up because I can go on forever. But I'll end with the saying to remember: nothing about us without us.
Thanks, Vicky. It's really important to remember, and personalisation has definitely been a theme of our last session, and I suspect will also be of this one today as well. Amy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Vicky. It's about that having things in the right format for people, isn't it, when you're asking those questions as well. And there's not really any excuse not to have that nowadays. Like there's so many ways that we can present information. There's specific organizations that are dedicated to like delivering things in Makaton or delivering it in easy reads or delivering that information in various different formats. So I actually do think it's the responsibility of the tech suppliers to deliver information in that way. So in the way that you would as any kind of manufacturer have your information on your data sheets about the equipment that you're supplying, I think that tech suppliers have a responsibility and a duty to supply information about their products in accessible formats, especially when those technologies are designed for the social care industry. So I think it's our duty to be delivering that. And one other point I just wanted to raise was about the kind of stage at which people are involved in that communication, because all too often I think decisions are made behind closed doors, really, and decision makers kind of start the process of thinking and planning and designing kind of without people involved in that. And perhaps it's because there's lots of people that at that point, you know, they're not sure who it applies to and what that looks like, and there are logistical reasons why that might happen. But actually, I think we need to remember that at every stage of introducing technology, we need to make sure that it's being co-designed with people, that if they're, you know, if we're thinking about a certain application of technology, you start with the problem, don't you? So you look at what's the problem we're trying to fix to start with. So there absolutely can be people's involvement in that, and then look at the ways to fix it, and you start designing it through that process. So I think we need to make sure that it happens really early on as well, and not just get to the end point and go, this is what's available. Do you want it or do you not want it? Because I'm not sure how much of a choice that really is.
Thanks, Amy. I think it's a really interesting perspective, and one I think we don't necessarily always hear that people expect technology suppliers to be involved in this conversation. So really important to sort of think around that as well and sort of hear that perspective. Jennifer.
So I've just scribbled a few points. Some of them of what I said before is, again, going back to whose data is it? And just to keep back, there's nothing new in some respects with technology, because we all know about the Mental Capacity Act, and it's following that, and keep on checking in. And I was just thinking that I've tried out from some of the work that I've done and from colleagues. I found out about i360, which you can use. This is again everyday tech, and I tried it out with my husband and I didn't like it, because he could actually see when I went to the park that I stopped, and he knew exactly who I'd talked to because I stopped outside someone's house, and he could see what I was doing, and I wasn't doing anything I shouldn't have been doing. But in a coercive relationship, if somebody starts tracking you, or if there's abuse within a care home or whatever setting, someone can use your location. You could, whether it's using a tracker on a phone or through one of the wearables that you buy. And I'd also had tried out a chat bot at home. Again, I was just wanted to know how it worked, and it at the moment it's not something that's for me. I mean, I'm a regular user of Alexa and things like that I can do voice recognition to do all sorts of tasks from, which is really useful. And the chatbot, I was demonstrating it, and the person who had given it to me free of charge, if you like, could see when I went on it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was showing it. I thought I was showing it to some friends who worked in tech in a different field, and they could actually, I didn't consent to anything. I verbally said, thank you, I'll try it. But I didn't realise until the first time that she could see when I'd gone on, when I'd used it, and see what I was doing with it. And I was messing around with it. So I thought, oh my gosh, that's the whole area. I don't want someone to know my private life and what I'm doing. And that's for me on a sort of trial. So goodness knows how it is for people who are using it for real. And I would just keep on going back and saying there's the Oxford statement on using AI ethically. It's there, it's being done, use it. And the other one is TLAB have done an awful lot of work on whose data is it. So perhaps Fiona could just put those links in the chat so people can see them.
Yes, we will definitely put those links in the chat. Thank you, Jennifer. I think you're right. There's the whole range of all of the different functionality and technology and what that means. And something we sort of have touched on briefly is we now have technology which is used as normal, so digital care record solutions or EMR, which quite often care services may say if you're not willing to have a digital care record, then we may not be able to provide care to you, as opposed to things like sensor-based technology, force technology, where you still, people can have care with it. So I guess if somebody was to say no to having tech involved in their care, what should happen next? How can we make sure they're still supported? Don't know who would like to come in first on the question.
I was going to say, all right, I think in terms of digital care records and things like that, it's an extension from us having sort of filing cabinets with people's data in that respect. But there should be a privacy notice for the care home that informs the user as to what that information and what they're doing with that data should be. Now, if somebody wants to refuse that, it may be part of an option to sort of offer something whereby it's a paper record that's kept instead as an alternative. And I think employers and care providers need to always be looking. You can't sort of necessarily force through one solution. That is not consent. That is not informed. You're effectively forced to use that, and that's the whole problem. We don't want to go down that route, and that's what the data protection is really trying to help, is to ensure that people ethically create systems, etc., so that people understand how that data is being utilized. So I think from a care perspective, it's very difficult. Notes have to be taken, records have to be kept as part of any sort of health and social care sort of thing. But if you're asking somebody that they have a camera in their own home or something like that, that is not a you have to show why that is necessary, and actually care can be provided without that camera being there. So I think Jennifer was mentioning about Nobi, and I know that they don't end up with the picture of the individual. You become a stick person on that. So then at least you know that your personal imagery isn't being captured. But where is that data going? Who's using that data? And if you leave the service, is your data automatically destroyed, or is it kept and used? How is that used, etc.? So that's the problem. There's always this scope creep, effectively, with anything that you use, where it sort of incrementally builds out, and people aren't aware of it sort of building out. And so your ability to say no on these points like digital care records is limited. But what you might want to do is say, I'm happy for you to hold these, but I don't want you to share that with anybody else. And you would be able to see through the privacy notice usually whether that data is shared with other people. It's so easy for the control to be lost. I think that's the problem. And the Data Protection Act is trying to say we need to keep a hold of this. And we as users of any tech, in the same way that when we buy something, can we look at the terms and conditions or the manufacturing? I think somebody used that sort of earlier, that analogy. We need to be interrogating it ourselves and looking at it, not just blindly accepting it. And so that, as you say, there should be a readable format that people should be able to access to understand what data are you holding about me, how long are you holding that for, and who are you sharing that data with?
Oh, no, thanks, Steve. Really, really good points. And Lindsay, from a care provider perspective, did you want to come in as well about how you're managing this? And then welcome to Amy and Vicky.
Yeah. So I think, if somebody wants to opt out of, for example, a digital care record system, that should be entirely achievable and still receive care. But it takes a bit more extra work from both the service provider and so probably social work team or ICB or something along those lines, to just make sure that everyone is aware that that is what has happened and that the person has requested and consented or not consented to having that care record being kept for them. So it definitely can happen. It's just that everyone would need to be in agreement that that is what is going to happen. And therefore, if someone asks for the last 6 weeks of records, they're not going to be available. That's not going to happen that way. But I also think from experience, it is about asking why somebody is not consenting, because it may be that they consent to part of it, but not all of it, or they're happy for you to have a record of maybe what medication they've been administered. So if there is an error, that is picked up quickly, but they're not happy for you to record every moment of their day and what they've done and who they've spoken to and what activities they've done, etc. So I think again it comes back to that dialogue of it's totally fine not to want to have that recorded about you, but can I ask why, and what is it that your concerns are about there? So I think that's it's doable. It just takes more work.
Thanks, Lindsay. Amy.
Thanks. Yeah, really similar kind of thoughts to everybody else, really, is that I think the debate comes in as part of the question, what's considered a work-based tool versus a person's own technology. And for me, the line, and it sounds like it for everybody else who's spoken so far, is around when it involves my data. So it might be okay, like in a hospital setting, for example, for me to choose the equipment that's going to work correctly for me to scan someone's arm or whatever the case may be. And it's a decision I need to make as the specialist, and lots of people are using it universally, and then my choice really is linked to whether or not I want my arm scanned in that way, isn't it? And what's the consequence of that? Actually, if it's using X-ray, is there a consequence, if I'm pregnant, and all of those things. So I need accessible data, information that is going to explain to me how this operates and what the pros and cons are to me. But I also need an alternative if I say no to the arm scanner. I'm obviously very technical when it comes to hospital equipment, and I think more and more frequently we're seeing a situation where things like magic notes are being used for assessment purposes, or maybe our sensor technology being used for assessment purposes, and that is considered the tool set and the tool of social worker to conduct an assessment. But in all of those cases, it does turn it into a bit of an opt-out scenario rather than here's a range of options and you can pick from one of them. And it kind of has to be, I think, from a practical perspective, because we can't operate really without a tool set that works, and people understand how the mechanics of it and can operate it effectively. But yeah, just to make the point really that it's probably not about multiple choices in these situations. It is probably about here's the one that we generally use, and I can opt out of that, but it needs to be a legitimate replacement if I do.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I think that's a really interesting point about, our expectations when it comes to healthcare and the technology that's used, as opposed to the expectations in social care, what that means. So I was talking to somebody in diagnostic radiography recently, and I asked, use a lot of AI, medical AI, is that, did you explain how that works? It's like, well, no, but I don't explain how an MRI machine works either. It's just a tool we use. So interesting. Vicky, from your perspective.
Thanks, Kate. And listening to what everyone's been saying so far on this question just reinforces the no one size fits all approach. But in terms of the actual question itself, you raise the point on what if someone has capacity now, but may lose that capacity later down the line, and say because of dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever. But here's something that some food for thought for everybody to think about. Imagine a scene where you have capacity now. How somebody asks you, "Who do you consent to this?" And you'll say yes or no, depending on what it is. And then the following day or even hours later, you're in a nasty road traffic accident and knocked into a coma. Now, I'm not wishing that on anybody, by the way. I'm just using that as an example. But if you're in a coma, knocked out through injury or whatever, do you think you'd be able to give consent or give permission? Somehow, I don't think so. And certainly when it comes to people with disabilities, especially if they might have a forgetful memory, like I will confess I do. And sometimes it's not that they lack capacity or are lacking or will lack capacity. It's just simply the fact that they have forgotten what they consented to. And so best solution around that, certainly from my own experience, is just drop little gentle reminders. Maybe not every day or every 2 minutes, like, oh, do you remember you agreed to this? Do you remember you agreed to that? That would probably, the person would probably get absolutely sick to the back teeth of hearing it after a while, and then probably might forget it anyway, which would defeat the object of the exercise. But where it's appropriate to offer little gentle reminders as to what they've agreed to do, and if you keep and if you do that works and it works, then the person remembers and the job gets done. Win-win and win-win. Happy days.
Thanks, Vicky. It's great. Mark.
Yeah, I think we should pick up on that sort of fluctuating capacity thing. But in answer to your question, I think that what springs to mind for me is that, with an increasingly sort of digital first world where we're going digitized, there is this danger of erosion of the service, the other channels and the more traditional ones, the paper-based, the telephone, face-to-face. Because invariably what happens is resources, money, and things go towards that, and the other things suffer from a bit of decline, and that presents an exclusion and a lack of choice. But I just think when someone says no about um, you know the digital aspects of care, and we don't respect that as valid or as an alternative choice, or there is no care or it's diminished care, then it sort of consent is an illusion, isn't it? It's almost a coerced participation. So I think it's really important to defend that analog pathway, very much so, and respect, that human right, if you like, to analog. Move it from that kind of people are digital objectors, that negative sum, to people who are advocates or guardians of that sort of the human aspect of it, rather than just digital. I think sort of finally picking up on another point is this kind of proportionality as well, is that, you can have some technology. You talked about Nobi lights. Is that what, we say yes to a bit of technology, but when is that disproportionate? If it's something which invades privacy, has 24/7 surveillance in areas which they don't want, picks up information, giving consent to having a sensor, and the sensor senses movements and changes and things, is a functional description of it. And I talked about consent transparency, is that actually saying, by consenting to this is what it actually means. The good things and the not so good things. So they feel properly equipped to understanding what it means to them rather than what it does. So I think for me, always maintain respect. Those people who say no, and you must give them an alternative pathway. It's their human right.
Thanks, Mark. And we will come back to the fluctuating consent conversation as well. Jennifer.
So before Mark spoke, I just jotted down about cost. So in the climate that we live, there isn't infinite resources, and all the time local authorities are having to look at how they can cut costs, and they're using things like sort of Genie, a sort of robot interaction. So where somebody may have had 4 calls a day, perhaps 2 of them can be done remotely, either using a human or some kind of AI type thing, and that's obviously could create more loneliness. And what happens if they don't want to do that? Are they still going to get what they need? Or is the default going to be like when I needed for a short period of time 24-hour care, and the default for me was going to a nursing home, and then you have to fight the system to get what you want. So where does the consent lie in cost cutting? And the other side is, one of the statements from the ethics was for the charity workers, talking that care workers want to be free from abuse and what have you. One of my carers had been going to someone's house where the family recorded everything, and she didn't give consent, so she couldn't use the toilet in that person's house because even the bathroom was being recorded, and whether or not the relative who needed the care consented or not. So that brings up to me an ethical issue. Okay, her family want to check that the care is being delivered in the right way, but should she be recorded having personal care and in the bathroom? And it happens, doesn't it? Many people have Ring doorbells. We've had an issue where I live that some children have been kicking doors. I mean, really kicking them, and it's recorded. So we've got photos coming out of our ears from the neighbours with children who are only 11 years old being sent around on a WhatsApp group and then reported back to the school. I'm sure the parents I wouldn't be happy if my child had I wouldn't be happy that my child was kicking someone's door down. But the other side is there's privacy on all levels, and consent to privacy.
Thank you. Some important but quite upsetting things, I think, for us to think about in that context, Jennifer. Amy.
Yeah, this comes back to like it may be your tool, but it's my data, isn't it? Like and in some cases it's my faith. And we see this, we've seen lots of examples, and I think this comes down to trust, and it comes back to that communication that we were talking about earlier and the open dialogue and being really clear about what we're planning to do with that information. There was something, and this is not a new thing. We think it's new because of AI, but I was looking in prep for this. I was just looking at some case examples, and one of them went back to 2015, where NHS patient data had been used to develop an AI tool on it was DeepMind with the Google platform, for the purposes of improving services and for decent kidney scanning and like using patient data. But it was 1.6 million people in that event, and it was picked up by the ICO, and obviously they did what they needed to do around that. But it was 1.6 million people in that event whose data was being used without their consent. And I think this is a concern at the minute about the ethical use of AI, is actual real clarity from tech suppliers and AI suppliers as to where is my information going and what does that look like. There's lots of good uses. Like we understand that we're trying to make things more efficient. We understand how we're trying to improve services and the information that's available. But actually, if I don't want to partake in that, I've got the right not to do that. So the other day I had to do some paperwork, and I was pushed towards the OneGov's, the one login site on gov.uk, and the option for me to sign the paperwork was to go through the one login, but use my facial recognition for it. And I'm not doing that. Like I don't choose to put my face into that platform. So obviously I had to go through a different process, which was much more long-winded and more convoluted. But we need to have accessible, timely alternatives to that situation. And you're right, there's a real fear that we're being pushed in that direction and my data is not my own, but we do have the right to hold on to it.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. That really reminds me as well of, we had a couple of years ago now the GP data planning and research, which was a big sort of proposed use of our GP record data, which prompted the largest number of people opting out of data sharing for planning and research purposes that we've ever seen in this country, because people didn't feel informed. Talked about, I think we really risk losing trust in situations like this. Mark.
Yeah, so it just reminds me, there's the government's got a consultation out at the moment on digital ID. So if you don't know, please, some of this, what we're talking about here is deeply relevant to that. I just picking up on a comment about family members wanting to check in on people, probably due to levels of anxiety, and check they're all right. But I think for me that sometimes this surveillance-based peace of mind does need to be challenged, because is this device for the resident's safety or the family's anxiety? And respect really means prioritizing the rights, the residents' rights to be unobserved over a family's desire to watch. And it just reminds me a little bit about I put in the chat about efficiency is a business metric, dignity is a human one. And I know that we're under pressures to make things more efficient, but technology should be used to create better outcomes and support that person. And about sort of surveillance, and you might say, or monitoring, it's for someone's safety, but it is important. But a life saved is not necessarily a life lived. And I think that if you're under a 24/7 surveillance and you don't like it and you find it distressing, we haven't saved them, have we? We just prolonged a state of distress and being watched, which isn't a good quality of life. So I think we just got to sort of understand that balance.
Mark, you're right. I think we're meant to be supporting people to live life well, not just to live. And that is something I think we really need to think about in the balance of this conversation. There's a really interesting comment here in the chat that, from Pam, I just want to bring in as well, about considering whether people should make advanced decisions around the use of technology, particularly thinking about fluctuating capacity, or sort of if somebody has no capacity and they made decisions beforehand. Is that something, how do people feel about that? Do you think that could be a positive step? Will people make their advanced wishes known?
Sorry, Katie, if I may jump in and quickly, that was one of the comments that I was gonna point out about if you can find out what the wants are in advance of anything happening. I mean, obviously, there's some events that you can't predict, like a car crash, or whatever. But there are some things that you can. I mean, I'm sorry to be very morbid, but the one thing that is certain in somebody's life, if you're born, you die. Right, and there's a lot of things that you see on the telly now, about funeral plans and prepaid funeral plans in advance. I get a ton of emails about them almost every day. Most of them end up in me junk box because they're all spam. But anyway, the point is, there's a big push around having a plan and for what happens when you die. I basically, I but why just wait until the inevitable when you go? Why not start finding out what the person's wants and wishes are right now while they're still alive and while they have capacity, just in case the worst happens later down the line.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Vicky. I mean, I'm in a bit of an unusual position because my grandparents worked in social care, my parents did, and now I do. So actually, weirdly, I'm in my, like, from when I was about 30, my entire family all had this conversation and have it mapped out around decision making. But appreciate that's probably a fairly unusual perspective. Amy, I saw your hand go up and go down. Did you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, only to say that I think it is great to plan ahead and think now what would I want then, but then also remember to keep updating it because your views change as you get older and things start to change for you, don't you, on your perspectives on life. There's one other comment, if I've got time to make it, was about, it's kind of tied to that really, about keeping on listening. So like, I've been in situations before where people have unplugged equipment and we've made the assumption that people, like they're doing it by accident. They go around, they tidy up at night, or they, and they're doing it on the way to bed because they like switching off the telly and all the other things. And sometimes that is the case, but sometimes we need to look deeper into that behavior and make sure that what they're doing is not declining the kind offer of having sensors and monitoring available to support them and support safety. And actually that is in itself a form of consent. So I know, working with Lindsay and other people in using sensor technologies, we would pay close attention to that and make sure that we're listening to that and making sure that's not communication as part of that situation.
Yes, I think a belt and braces approach to this is really important. I think that the idea of having, this sort of substitute judgment or sort of advanced plans around these things is really useful. So in a number of areas of life, from birth and birth planning through is usually a really good sort of fallback when someone doesn't have capacity for whatever reason. So it's more of an echo of people's sort of lifelong values and what they want. However, as Amy said, it needs to be constantly checked and invited. And those things can change. I don't, mixing various analogies, I might change my mind. I might not want that cup of tea. And I've the full right to say no, and I don't want another cup of tea. That's okay. And probably just use something from my childhood, and some probably quite inappropriate, but a scene from Monty Python's Meaning of Life where, someone who'd signed a donor card many years ago, the flat was entered into, and they took the person's organs, and he was saying, no, no, I don't want them taken now. Oh no, but you signed a donor card years ago. And I think that just that sort of analogy springs to mind, obviously, of comedy value, but it's there for a reason. That's ridiculous. And we should treat it that way. So we should constantly check, but also have somewhere where we can refer to what their person's wishes are and would have been, if they don't currently have capacity.
Thanks, Mark. And also thanks for the reminder that I definitely need to rewatch Monty Python at some point. It's been a while. We are running out of time, but I wanted to make sure there's a question from Sharon in the chat quite early on, and it is something which has been touched on, but just wanted to give people an opportunity to respond. So she asked what people's views are about opt-in consent versus opt-out consent and any challenges you see in this area, and wanted anybody who had some views to have an opportunity to come in on that one. Vicky.
Yes, thank you, Katie, and thank you, Shannon, for that question. Opt-in, opt-out is absolutely crucial. Especially if seeing something either by email or by text message is causing distress because it reminds them of something. And so, if I can use a personal example, up until about, nearly 5 years, 6 years ago now, how I was married, but when that broke down in summer of 2020, and I was still getting emails from the people supplying the gas, and Mrs. Buckingham, and that was my surname back then, Buckingham, and I really want to unsubscribe and get my email address taken off and that, just because I find it upsetting. It reminds me of the bad times. But unfortunately, in this particular scenario, there isn't an option to, because I don't now have his up-to-date email address. So they won't. Plus, because it's under my ex-husband's name. It has to be done by him, not me. So that's unfortunate, but hey ho. But it does highlight one of the reasons for the importance of being able to opt out, on whatever the reason, on whether the person's lost interest or it's causing distress, like it was in my case. So, absolutely, I think that is very, very important. Doesn't matter who you are.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks for sharing a personal story about this. Lindsay.
Thanks. So I think the way I would think about this is opting in is you'd have to actively give consent for something to happen, and opting out would be you tick a box to say that's fine rather than really being engaged in the conversation. So I would guess that opting in benefits and respects the person who will be having the tech involvement in their life, because they would have to engage in that conversation and dialogue, etc. Or a family or best interest group would have to engage in that dialogue. Whereas opting out is going to benefit the provider or the care organisation that's involved in that, because it's going to be the most efficient option, isn't it? Because if you don't opt out, then you've opted in effectively. So I would say the gold standard has got to be opting in, hasn't it? That's got to be what we desire for particularly vulnerable people who are receiving care. Then we need to take that time to be focusing on consent, dialogue, capacity, opting in, and opting out should really be the lazy the opposite of gold standard, the rubbish standard.
Some very, very vigorous head nods to that point of view, Lindsay. So thank you. So we've had quite a wide-ranging conversation today. I think some of the common themes which have been coming through, to me at least, is the complexity of explaining some of the detail about AI and technology and what it means to an individual. And that really can then make it difficult to receive informed consent from somebody that they truly understand and feel like that it's been properly explained the whole different ways in which technology can impact on their care. We've had a couple of tips, but just to sort of round things off, I was just wondering if people have views on how we can explain things in a way which is genuinely meaningful, in a way which is informed consent, in any approaches that we could take on that. Amy.
I've always kind of followed this theory. I guess it's part of the Mental Capacity Act as well. It's quite clear in, the capacity test and what that looks like and the stages to that. But it being about being in the right format, being the right time, I think that is so important when it comes to asking people questions. If they're about to go out somewhere and they're not really focusing, or if they've just come back from a long day and they're tired at night, is that the right time? It's a human response, isn't it? It's about being it's about caring about the person and empathizing with when they are best going to accept, understand, interpret, and be able to share back this information. And having the right person to deliver that. Like, it's not, it doesn't, there's no kind of like rule book other than doing it right for that person on how or who should share that information. And actually, if it's a teacher that somebody really, really likes at college, and they're probably the best person to start sharing bits of information with because they'd feel awkward doing it with their mum or whatever the situation may be, then actually that's the right person to ask those questions and have it in the right format for people. So that's my opinion. That's my view.
Thanks, Amy. Mark.
Yes, I think we need to, as a technologist, it's very easy to talk tech. And I think that when we try to explain these things, we need to stop trying to explain how the engine works and start explaining where where it's going, where it's taking us in a way that I think informed consent around AI isn't about understanding algorithms. It's about having this kind of a consequence. I mentioned it earlier, a consequence transparency or literacy. So we understand what that actually means for them in terms of the good things, but also what that actually means in terms of the consequences of them granting that consent. And if you put it in that person-centered terms, which people understand because it manifests, rather than in relation to their life, rather than explaining that there's a black box there where AI goes in and does stuff and it loops and it's meaningless. So I think that if we can work towards explaining the consequences and focus on that kind of literacy, I think that people would be better informed and be able to give informed consent.
Thank you. An opportunity then for the whole panel, if anyone has any final thoughts or reflections that you'd like to share. For people not watching the chat, it's been an interesting conversation about organ donation. So there are lots of links about that now in there.
I would like to just say that if we really care, and using that word care, if we really care, then we need to care about the person's past, current, and wants and their views all the time, because as as Lindsay said and I said in the chat, that not doing that, the opting out rather than the opting in is lazy, and that's not good care. It's lazy care. And I think that if we really genuinely believe in good care, then that kind of active consent is respectful and demonstrates that we do actually care about that person.
The legal position is that you must opt in. You can't have pre-ticked boxes or anything else along those lines. You have to, that's, as you say, that's choice, that's informed consent, that's taking the active points, and that's really what the ICO guidance and what the data protection and the new act are all about, is ensuring that people can make informed choices, and can track where their data is going. But I just think it's hard to do that when you're up against sometimes commercial objectives, like the example of people who were going along for scanning and not realizing that their data was actually being commercialized, and people were benefiting financially off of those people's data to which they were contributing and were unaware. And it's back down to what you've all said about having that conversation and being transparent and being open with people. And I think in care, you've still got that option and that availability to sort of really sit down and have a meaningful conversation to say, look, I think this AI would benefit you, or this would benefit you, but you've also need to have done the back work to make sure that what you're putting forward and offering aligns with what those people who are selling and making money off of advancements adheres to what you're sort of selling forward, etc. So it's very difficult, and it's only going to get more complicated to an extent, I think, as well.
I'm pleased we didn't promise in this series to fix all of the problems, just to talk about them. Vicky.
Yeah, just a very quickie on my part, Kate, and that's the importance around consent, whatever form it takes, digital or otherwise, needs to be accessible. So, I mean, again, a bit of a personal example. I'm sure most people on here are aware of the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. And when that first came out, I knew it was going to affect the company I do some work for, or Together All Are Able. But at that time, I didn't fully understand exactly what. I mean, I know what it means now, but at the time it first came out, I just didn't hardly know anything about it. And what would have been helpful at that point is some accessible, easy read information about what it's about, on what it means for organisations and what actions might need to be taken as a result of it. And so, I mean, yes, I can try and help people to understand it now if they're not sure, but before I can help make it easy to understand for other people, I've got to be able to understand it myself. And so, just some food for thought there. Anyway, I'm done.
Vicky, I think that's the first time I've ever heard somebody say, I'm going to be brief, and then mention GDPR in the same sentence. That was great. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I'm so grateful to the panel. I think something which Vicky mentioned right at the beginning, but I just want to sort of leave here as well, is, nothing about us without us. We really need to make sure that the person is kept in the centre. And that's really been the conversation, I think, throughout. And I'm very grateful to people's perspectives. If people enjoyed this conversation and wanted to catch up on the one last week, where we really went into that privacy surveillance sort of deep dive, the link to the YouTube recording of that is in the chat. You can find it on our YouTube channel as well. And anybody who wants to talk about robotics and what this might mean for the future of care, and, are all carers going to be replaced by robots? Spoiler, we don't think so or not. Our next difficult conversation will be on the 31st of March, and we'll make sure you will receive a link to register for that if you're interested. So that just leaves me to say thank you so much to my amazing panel. You've all been fantastic. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today over lunch. I appreciate it's a bit heavy for a lunchtime conversation. And hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.